It feels just right. It feels like and looks like how the real locomotive should. All the detail is there, and that's really all I got to say. It's the mantra of this model. The detail is there. A big hello to you. I hope I find you well. I'm Jennifer Kirk and welcome back to the channel. We're up here in the loft on Weir Yard, and today I'm going to be taking a really good close look at the all-new Dapol Mogul locomotive in 00. This is a locomotive that we've been looking forward to for quite some time, and they've finally arrived, and Dapol have very kindly sent over an example for me to take a closer look at and to show you guys the ins and outs of the model. Now, this model is one of the first to incorporate some really innovative new features, and it's something that I'm really interested to see how it stacks up. So in association with our sponsor Trainomatic, makers of DCC decoders and accessories, come with me and let's take a closer look. So here is the new model from Dapol. You can see there on the box, GWR 6300 260 Mogul steam locomotive, and we get a little stylized line drawing of it on the front box. This is pretty standard for the Dapol packaging. To give you the catalogue number of this model, we've got 4S-043-007, and this is actually the club special. But we have recently seen the demise of the Dapol Collectors Club, sadly. So I have spoken with Dapol, and apparently these will now be being sold as a Dapol exclusive. So I'm guessing that these will be available only direct from Dapol through their website. However, there are a number of other different versions in BR Black, in various GWR liveries, and they are available through the usual channels, and we've got an affiliate link down below that takes you to Rails of Sheffield if you like the look of these locomotives, and it does mean that you can pick one up for yourself. They come in DC ready, just like this is, but Dapol also do DCC fitted, so you don't have to undertake a DCC decoder fitting yourself, and also DCC sound fitted. This is the plain DC model, and I'm going to show you how to DCC fit it yourself using the Trainomatic Next 18 decoder. You can see one there in the packet. So we'll be doing a full install of that, and I'm really keen to actually see the method that Dapol have used, because it's something that it's been much talked about, and I know from experience, and I know a lot of you have also said you've had experience of it being really tricky to DCC fit some locomotives. Now Dapol have taken that on board, and with this it's a screw-free, wire-free. You just pull out a PCB board from behind the smokebox door and just fit your chip that way. And I believe if you want to sound fit it as well, it is equally as easy. There is space for a speaker in the tender, and there's also space for a speaker in the smokebox, and I believe it's set up so that, as standard, if you fit sound, you can just use the speaker in the smokebox, but if you want that extra bass oomph, it has the means to add that in the tender. Now, I will show you the instruction book. It's really, really comprehensive, and it's something I really do like about the leaflet that does come with the Dapol models. So you can see there we've even got a little bit of history. A total of 342 locomotives built by the Great Western Railway at Swindon Works between 1911 and 1932, so quite a long-lasting design. The 4300 class soon became known as Moguls. Of course, that's the wheel arrangement 260, and I'm not sure who actually decides these. You know, we've got things like Pacific, Atlantic, Baltic, and some more esoteric ones like Centipede, Decapod, Consolidation, Mikado, but 260 260s, commonly known as Moguls. Designed by G.J. Churchwood for use on mixed traffic duties, they could actually reach 70 miles an hour passenger stock, and they were also quite wide-ranging. And what was interesting was that the first withdrawals took place in 1936, but these 100 locomotives were used as the basis for the Grange and Manor classes. And they lasted through to 1964 with 2 preserved. And there's even some details here about specifications. So we've got toolless DCC decoder and speaker fitting, which we will get onto later in this review. Brass bearings, sprung buffers, and it will do down to radius 2. And I'm going to test it on less than that, and what you tend to find is that they look a bit off, they struggle a bit. It may actually go around tighter than that, but they guarantee it down to second radius. We've got a lot of cast metal in this, and it's the tender drawbar I'm really interested to see, because unlike a lot of other models, we don't have the wires trailing across. It's just a plug-in connector that gives you the same conductivity as those plugs and wires without the risk of them getting strained. So we've also got the firebox flicker as well, which is pretty much becoming standard across the Dapol range. We have seen it from other manufacturers, but certainly we saw in the Terrier, we've seen in the B4 dock tank as well, and it does add an extra dimension, especially if you're running on DCC. So it says here, no special running in or initial lubrication is required. So we are going to test this running as is out of the box, but as a matter of course, I do always try and run things in. I find that even though a manufacturer say, you know, it will work perfectly well out of the box, and generally they do tend to get a little bit smoother, especially at low speeds with a lot of running in. So it isn't necessary you can start enjoying this locomotive right away, but I will be doing that later on. And then there's a lot of information here about that DCC fitting and also spare parts. I think it's actually safe to say that you can buy the entire locomotive as spare parts if you so chose. Although a bit like car parts, I suspect that it will cost you 3 times as much to build one from spares as it will to just buy a model ready built from the factory. Plus you don't have the aggro of putting it together. Right, so enough about the box, because I know that certain people really get far too excited and go, no, please, I want to see the model. So we're going to get straight onto that. We get a little pack here, and this has got a speaker enclosure if you add in a speaker, and it looks to be for pretty much the same size speaker as what the Terrier came with. And there's some pipes in there as well. But then also we've got this tool, and that's actually what this bit is, and that's the tool for getting into the smoke box to be able to DCC fit it. Now the reason they've supplied this, and it does say in the instructions, is it's made out of a very soft plastic that won't scratch or damage the paint finish. The smoke box door is a push fit, there's no magnets, nothing like that, but by using this it saves you from running the risk of scratching the model, which I think is a great little touch. So we're going to put that to one side because we will come back needing that for the DCC fitting. Now let's just get it out of the box. Standard clamshell packaging, and here we are. We have this lovely model. It's actually in the box separate, and you can see what I mean about this drawbar assembly. I'm going to actually show you that. So you can see there we have, it's just almost like a piece of PCB board. So we've got, it's double-sided, so we get 4 connectors on there, and it is actually, there is some movement in it. It is sprung loaded. You can see there it's got a degree of movement for the tender to move about as required, but it is actually fairly robust. And on the tender itself, there's just a kind of a plastic slot there, and again there's a full degree of movement on that. And what Dapol recommend is place it generally on the track or any flat surface, line them up, and then they just kind of push together. So I'm going to see now just how easy that is. So line them up with the slot and just push them firmly, and you feel a click, And it doesn't take a lot of force, but you can see there that they are actually nicely connected, and there's a good deal of movement there on the tender for going round corners. And then when you come to take them apart, just grip, gently pull, and they pop back apart. It will be interesting to see how well that stands up. There's quite a small piece of plastic there that goes into a little clip just to hold them together. So it will be interesting to see how that stands up with repeated use. And what I would probably say, and this isn't Dapol's recommendation, it's just my personal recommendation, just to be on the safe side, I will personally be leaving this locomotive coupled up unless I absolutely need to. I think that, like anything else, repeated coupling and uncoupling, I personally wouldn't do it, although Dapol, I believe, are on record as saying that this is designed to be nice and robust. So for the first part of the review, I'm going to keep these separate because it does make it a lot easier to show you these things. So first things first, the actual locomotive itself. I do like the finish on this, the green in particular. I think green always suits a locomotive. Any little marks you see are just my sweaty fingers rather than on the paint. There's a lovely kind of satin finish. I particularly like the satin finish on the smoke box, and it really does, it shines, but it's not that full gloss. Underneath the model there, underneath the boiler, you can see the representation of the motion, at least I think. Yeah, it's a representation of the motion, and that is really nicely done. And you can see it there under the running plate as well. There's sort of air gaps where there needs to be air gaps. You can see right through under the boiler. That is really nicely done. We saw that on the Terrier as well, and it was one of the detail areas I picked up that really stood out on that model. I'm just looking for parting seams. I'm not sure. It's just along there, you can just see a line. Is that replicated on the other side? It is. Now, I'm not entirely sure. Is that a parting seam? I think it's a parting seam, but this is actually a very cruel light. I've got a light just up there. You can see the glow on my fingers. So this is cruel magnification and very, very harsh light. And actually, under normal viewing angles, you can't see anything there. The firebox does seem to have captured that Swindon tapered shape really, really nicely. We got some washout plugs there, really crisp, nicely done, and the rivet detail as well. Really, really nicely done. The lining is crisp and sharp. And just looking in there, there are some options for detail differences on these locomotives. And I think one of the biggest ones is some of the locomotives in later rebuilds got steam pipes that you see either side of the smoke box coming from the cylinders, and they are, as far as I'm aware, done accurately to match the members of the class that either had them or didn't. This particular one, 6308, doesn't have them. Does look really, really nice. And there's no sign of where they would go, as it were. It's been done really well. So, you know, it's not like I've seen on some models, you kind of get little holes for where alternative detail goes, and there's none of that on this. We're also getting these bracing stanchions at the front, very characteristic of Great Western Railway locomotives. And I do like the kind of curve in the actual running plate there. Really nicely done. On the front buffer beam face, we get the coupling draw hook and what appears to be I think it's the vacuum pipe. It's all factory fitted, nicely done. We've got that kind of satiny red on the buffer beam. Really does work there. We've also got some extra colouring just down there, like a brass colour. And that rivet detail, the other detail, is really, really nicely done. Now I'm just going to try and get the front face on. I've got to centre the front bogie, otherwise if the bogey's to one side, it draws the eye and makes you think that things are a bit skew-whiff when they're not. But that does look all pretty square there. So you can see the front face, we've got a shed code plate of 88A and the number there, 6308. Really crisply done. And actually what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just try and get the tool that comes in the packaging. I'm just going to see if I can get the smoke box door open. So I'm just looking around there, and it talks about getting this under the hinges. That is actually quite a tight fit there. I will add that it is very difficult to do this and film it at the same time. But I can see why they've given an extra tool. This would be so easy to actually damage the paint finish. So just trying to get underneath. Oh, that came out all right. It is just an interference fit, and when I pick this up, you can see there we've got a really fine smoke box dart and a lamp iron bracket as well at the top. So just be a little bit careful there. I think now knowing from this that they do tend to flick out a little bit, just be ready for that. You don't want the carpet gods to claim their smoke box door. But you can see it does come out, and if we look there very closely, that tool has done its job and there is no scratching at all to the paint. And you can see in there the actual PCB board. I'm just going to get my needle nose pliers, and if I just grab carefully hold and pull this out, what you actually see is this just comes out, and again, no solder, no wires, no real plugs. It's just a bit of an edge connector there, really nicely done. There's the blanking plate, and later on what we're going to do is we're going to do a full DCC fitting, but I need to run this on DC first. You can see inside there, you see the plug at the back, and there's some kind of grooves down each side which make locating this an absolute doddle. Just push it in and you can feel it locate. It doesn't need much pressure, and there we go. So I'm just going to put that back in there. Let's just see how easy this is to do. Very easy, as it turns out. It just, you feel it pop into place, absolutely no problems whatsoever. The actual safety valve dome there, that is really nicely done, and Dapol have got the brass colour just right. It's very easy to make brass just look like plastic painted with brass, but that has been done in such a way it does look like brass metal. These tapered handrails, really nicely done. They're made of wire. And also look down the funnel there, we've got a hole all the way down. There is a bit of a lip down inside, but unless you got it under a bright light like this, you would never see it. And that does mean that if you fit this with sound, if you've got the speaker down there, it does let the chuffing sound out, and actually lets it out of just the right place. So it is very nice and authentic. Looking down the other side, we've got extra parts there which nicely fitted out in red. I think that's the reversing leverage. Yeah, it corresponds with the lever in the cab, and actually this cab is very exquisite. And of course we've got the firebox flicker, which will be in there. It's modelled with the firebox doors open. We've got the fire hole, and what you see there is kind of a black void. Once we get this fired up, we'll see what the firebox flicker is like. I really do love all of that detail, and one of the things that this tender drawbar mechanism does allow is an unobtrusive look at all of this detail. I mean, look at those gauges at the top. I dare say if I could get the magnification up, it's just going at the limits of what this camera will do, but you can see the needles on the gauges and everything. That is very exquisite. I love that. And the regulator lever looks to be a separately applied piece as well. In fact, a lot of this pipework is as well. That is really, really nice. The rest of the cab is just sort of green with the black floor, but that really does. I really like that. So that's a massive plus point. The full plate there, I'm just seeing, is it sprung? There is a little bit of spring to it. It's a little bit difficult to to work that out. I'm not quite sure what this void is underneath here. There's kind of like a void just underneath the cab floor. I'm just looking in there. I can't really see any reason for it, but it's not something that you would see once the tender is in place. The steps as well, really nice and robust. They're not glued on, they are part of the casting. It makes them incredibly strong, and they hold that detail really, really well. The actual connecting rods, though, I don't know if they look a bit flat, I have to say. We've got the representation of the oil boxes at the top, but there's no fluting whatsoever on these. But they are nicely done. They are all metal. We've got fluting on the main piece there. That looks nice. The end of the crosshead slide does look to be splayed out a little bit more than on the prototype. And by the looks of it, that is one of the compromises that has to be made in model form. And looking at that there with the limited movement I can just do there with the model not powered, it looks to be that that's been done for pure reliability to avoid this piece from hitting those. And there was an element of splaying on the prototype. This looks a little bit more splayed, but I'm not convinced that it really detracts from the model at all. We've got fully metal piston, cross slide, and that is good because it does mean that this is a very durable item. I've seen plastic ones of these from other manufacturers, and I'm not convinced that they have the durability. I love the rivet detail along the running plate, really nicely done. This is all cast metal. The splashes are really nicely done. I do love that detail underneath the boiler. Really does work well. The lining on the cylinders, ever so nicely done. And again, got that characteristic fat Great Western look. It just captures them ever so well. We've also got the drain cock linkage underneath, which is factory fitted, which it can be on this model because the pony truck is way forward as per the prototype. And I do also really like they've captured the look of the front face of these wheels exceptionally well. It's all metal. There is a lot of metal construction in here. And even like the fact that the pony truck is prototypically correct, even down to the construction of the actual frame of it. The brake rodding is factory fitted, and we've got brass bearings down there. It did say that in the manual, but it does mean that when I'm just moving these slightly, it's silky smooth. It'd be nice to see this on the rolling road. The full brake rigging's in there, the brake blocks really nicely done. And these wheels with the correct different pattern counterweights, we've got what look to be cast counterweights front and back, and then these extra pieces riveted on. On the model it is all one casting, but it's captured the look of the prototype really nicely. The rest of the detail, lining on the cabs, nicely done. We've got the blue D and the number there, not an etched plate, but actually the printing on that really does work well. Not a lot to detract on this, it has to say. Really pleased with the look of the locomotive. Inside that cab is lovely. I particularly like the dials on there. It's just so nicely done. So I'm going to put that to one side and let's turn to the tender. And again, this is a characteristic churchwood tender, and it captures that standout look really well, where we've got this sort of flange up near the top, flaring out, and that is captured ever so well. I particularly love the rivet detail, and there's a good weight to this tender as well. But the wheels, reasonably free running. We've got pickup wipers there that appear to be running on the very top of the flanges. I'll have to take a look at those and see just how durable they're likely to be with long-term running. But again, we've got all the brake detail is factory fitted. The water scoop is in there. The coupling is, pardon me on that, that's the coal insert. It is removable. I'm just going to put that to one side because it is just going to fall out again. We will come to that. The actual coupling has this kind of self-centering close coupling mechanism that you see more normally on coaches, but that is a nice touch. It's in a standard NEM pocket. Back detail on there, really nicely done. That riveting as well is great, and the kind of flare out at the top of the tender body is so nicely done. There really isn't anything that I've seen thus far on the tender that I could put down as a detraction. The lining is straight and true. You see how it follows those rivets perfectly. The curve, even though that's actually going over quite a complex shape, that is really nicely done. And of course the lion emblem there, the British Railways emblem, so nicely done. Really nice and crisp. Now I'm going to turn to the tender top. We've got this kind of dome at the back. Again, very characteristic feature of particularly things like castles. I remember from my Hornby 00 castle, but that is ever so nicely done. We've got separately fitted handrails, water filler there at the back, and again that lovely satin finish with the black. With the coal load removed, you can see the internals of the tender are captured perfectly, and it does also leave quite a good deal of space in there for the optional bass speaker. We've got extra fittings here on the front, really nicely done. All of that detail is there just as it should be. Now the coal insert is just a resting fit plastic insert. You can see that quite a nice representation of the coal, and it is cut out to be a perfect fit, and that just fits down there. There is a little bit of a rattle, but from all viewing angles it's not obvious that that's just a plastic insert, and it's really nicely done. But the fact that you can just take that out does mean that if you want to put a real coal load in there, that's absolutely easy to do. I'm going to get this set up now, and we're going to test run it on DC first, see how well it runs, run it in, and then we're going to do the full DCC fitting guide, and we're going to get it running on the layout. So I've put the locomotive and tender onto my programming track actually. So I'm just going to try pushing these together. They should line straight up, making sure everything's on the track, and they just push together. I can do that one-handed. Really easy mechanism, and quite pleased to see that. I'm going to move this over now onto my DC test track. So we've got a set of the DCC Concepts rollers here. Really useful way of test running a locomotive, especially if you have, like me, your main layout as DCC. This of course allows you to test locomotives and run them in on DC without needing to mess about on the track. So this is the first time I've powered this model up. Just going to go to the power track, and that's actually a really smooth pickup. Like Dapol said, it does not require running in. This is straight out of the box, and you can see it is quite happily running at a very light crawl there. Not really feeling any hesitation. It's had no oil, no previous running. This is just how it comes out of the box from Dapol. And it does go up to quite a fast speed, but I'm particularly keen on that low speed. Let's try it the other way. A little bit of a tight spot. Let's just try that again. Not quite as smooth forwards, but this is where leaving it to run in, I always find, is of benefit. So what I'm actually going to do now, you can see, runs just fine on DC. I'm going to leave this locomotive for 20 minutes just to let it bed in, and we'll see whether that slight tight spot goes away. Had this running now for about 15 minutes, and it is definitely a little bit smoother. Still got a little bit of a tight spot there, but it's nowhere near as bad as it was. Still running on DC, it's running on the rollers as well. So it'll be interesting to see just how well this performs on the layout. But I'm actually more than happy with that. And I'm going to move on now to the DCC fitting so we can get it running on the layout. So for DCC fitting, what we recommend is the Trainomatic 18-pin decoder. And as you can see, it's a really nice small decoder, and it works pretty well just out of the box without any real need, I find, to fiddle about with CV settings unless you're wanting something very specific from the locomotive's performance. So we've got that ready and we're going to fit this locomotive with it. So we've got that tool that comes in the packaging. As I showed you before, this is all about not marking or damaging the paintwork. So just for ease of use, I'm going to separate the locomotive and tender. It just makes it a little bit easier to deal with. And we're going to use the tool to very carefully prise off the smoke box door. And I just leave my finger over the top there just to stop firing the smoke box door out off into the deep blue yonder. So I'm going to put that to one side, and the tool that I need here is just a set of needle nose pliers. You don't need any screwdrivers, there's no plugs to undo or anything. It's just simply a case of resting this just on the end of the board. You don't want to put it right in and squeeze because you might damage some of the components, but just on the very end of that board and just pull it out. It is not toughly fastened in, it's not hard fastened in, it is really easy to remove. And you can see on the underside as well, we've got the solder-free tabs as well for adding in a speaker on the underside. There is, in the box of bits, a surround there that just clips on if you do that. There's a lot of detail in the instructions on that. This is the blanking plate here on the top, and what I'm going to do is just rock that free. So pull that out, and then we're going to move to the next 18 decoder. And what you'll see with this is actually the decoder is smaller than the blanking plate. So the QC that you see on there is the uppermost side, and then on the underside you can see the actual connector. So with this, all we need to do is to just line up the sockets. When they're lined up, it's just simply a case of very gently pushing it into place, and you'll feel it click, and that is now in position, and we can reinsert this back into the locomotive. So as I showed you before, the actual plug's way down there in the bottom, and we've got these grooves either side which allows us to perfectly line up the PCB board, drop it back, and then very, very carefully, in fact you don't even need the tool to do this, rest a finger on it and just firmly but gently push back, and you'll feel it click into place. And then all that's left to do is to line up the smoke box door. Be very careful with the actual smoke box dart and the lamp iron bracket. It's just a very easy, snug push fit and you're done. And that's it. It's as easy as that to DCC fit this locomotive. I'm going to put it on the programming track, and what I always choose to do is to actually program it up as the locomotive's number, in this case 6308. Out of the box, factory set, all the decoders, including the Train-O-Matic ones, come preset to number 3. On the track, it performs reasonably well forwards, and this is going up a hill. So we've got a reasonable start. Still a little bit of a tight spot, it has to be said, but it is improving as I keep this running. I'm going to change its direction. In reverse, it is absolutely silky smooth, and it does run really, really well. So I've got every faith that with running in and over time, it will be a really reliable performer. Now, it has to be said, I had this test run on a train. I got up to 7 coaches before I started to see signs of slipping just on the gradients. On the level, it actually handled 9 coaches with absolutely no problem. So if your track is absolutely level, this locomotive has no problem in getting a train moving and keeping it moving. But on the gradients, I found it cut back to 7 before really it just started slipping too much. On the actual 4% gradients on the layout, I found that it was struggling a bit for grip on the corners and could only handle a few wagons, but that's about average for a steam locomotive. I also found that actually it would go round radius 1 curves, and indeed I've got one particular curve that is slightly less than radius 1, although this did cause the front wheels to derail. But as Dapol say, radius 2 is really the minimum. I'm not going to mark it down for that. I think it performed very, very well. Now, to compare this locomotive with a different finish on a number of other Great Western locomotives from different manufacturers, we've got the Bachmann 56XX, which does look a little bit glossier. I think compared to that, the green finish is much better. It's kind of closer to what we see on the Hornby Saint class there, which admittedly is Great Western livery rather than BR livery, but actually I don't have any Hornby locomotives in a BR green, so that was the closest I could get. Further back, we've got again a Bachmann 45XX Prairie, and as you can see, that's probably a better green. It's a little bit darker, but certainly not quite as glossy as the 56XX, and I think that this locomotive does fit in very, very well. It's close enough to be fine in my eyes because there would be variance between different paint shops, locomotives that had gone through works recently, depending on which works did the painting, which batch of paint. There's so many different variables that actually there's no one true green shade really, so it does fit in with the rest of the fleet. The rest of the running characteristics were absolutely fine, nothing really to fault at all. So I'm really pleased to be able to put this locomotive to the test here on Weir Yard, and it has coped very, very well indeed. One area that didn't seem quite as good as it could have been was, in my opinion, the firebox flicker effect. It was really, really pronounced on the Terrier that Dapol did. But on this model, if I turn it on, it is barely visible. So I'm going to turn it off and on. I am told that there may be a way to adjust the brightness on that with CV settings, but I haven't yet delved into it, and it did feel as though that was an area that from the factory perhaps consideration should be given for just making it a little bit brighter. As it is, you need to either turn all your lights off or somehow fiddle with the CV settings to really make that visible in almost all situations. This now brings me to the scores for this locomotive, and we've had it extensively on test up here on Weir Yard, and I'm really pleased with a lot of the things that I've seen with this. So first up, looking at finish, and I thought that this was really, really good. Great build quality to it. A lot of weight has been put in, and a lot of thought and care and attention has gone into parts of a model which historically have not been given the kind of treatment that we see on this, such as the motion that's underneath there, and a lot of the in-cab details as well. I didn't really find any great problems with the locomotive. Now, it did say that it didn't need running in, but I did find improvement with extended running. But of course, as per Dapol's claims in the instructions, it did run reasonably well straight out of the box. Everything else that's here is really nicely done. The build quality is pretty good, so I've got no hesitation to give this a 9.5 out of 10. Where this locomotive really did score well was the functionality. It ran perfectly, it hauled a prototypical load, and it hauled it well. It sailed around the track gracefully. I didn't have any problems with derailments or sticking wheels or anything like that. And as I found it, this model just ran ever so well. It's available in a number of different livery options from Dapol, and if you follow the affiliate links in the description box down below, you'll be able to find them all for sale at Rails of Sheffield at what we believe to be a very favourable price. You can get it in BR Black, BR Green, and then also various GWR liveries. There are detailed differences between different versions of the model that Dapol have tooled up for, such as the outside steam pipes, so you can get a model that is detail specific to your period, to the livery that it wears, and it's a really nice touch, and we're seeing this coming through from a lot of different manufacturers, and Dapol is no exception. I particularly liked the all metal connecting rods, crosshead, and piston detail. I did think that the connecting rods were a little bit flat in their appearance, but it is something that from actually normal viewing distances, when it's running on the layout, it didn't really detract at all. I really like the fact that all of the brake rigging is factory applied. This can often be a real pain to apply if you have to fit it yourself, and Dapol have taken away that problem really, really well. I also like the construction of the front pony truck. It's very free moving and it has that spindly construction which alludes to the prototype's construction. But don't be fooled into thinking that that makes it very, very delicate. I've had no problems whatsoever with this running on the layout. There's no twisting to that assembly in there, but it does look really, really good. And that bodes well for pretty much the rest of the model. Dapol have found ways to do things in a way that makes them look prototypically correct, but without compromising its integrity and strength. The whole model feels quality from start to finish, from the very, very strong box right down to the extensive use of metal in its construction. It just feels well made, sturdy, and reliable. So on functionality, I'm going to give it a 9.8 out of 10. When it comes to ease of use, this is where this model performs incredibly well. I love that pull-out PCB for DCC fitting. It also extends for if you want to sound fit it. It couldn't be more easy. It really is so simple. You don't have to worry about trapped wires. You don't have to worry about dislodging detail when you dismantle this. You don't have to worry about screws going missing. Dapol supply you with the tool to ensure that there's no damage to the paint, and just sliding out that PCB is so easy. This locomotive has been a pleasure and a doddle to DCC fit, and quite simply I think anybody, regardless of skill level, will be able to do their own DCC fitting. Of course, Dapol do supply it ready DCC fitted with their own Dapol Imperium decoder, but if you want the flexibility of doing it yourself with a whole myriad of different DCC decoder suppliers, including Trainomatic, whose details you can find in the link in the description box, it is so easy to do. But that ease of use does not stop there. I'm also really pleased with the method of connection between the locomotive and tender, and it just pulls apart or pushes together. I would say that until I've used this an awful lot, I do have some reservations about how strong that connection is for repeated connecting and disconnecting, but certainly it is so much better than those plugs and wires that we've had to suffer from locomotives for so long. So Dapol have to be really applauded for taking on this bugbear and actually delivering a workable, practical solution, and I love it. So I've got no hesitation to give this the full 10 out of 10. I think the innovation on this model certainly deserves it. On the aesthetics, well, the locomotive delivers in this area too. And it's like I've said over and over again, you can tell the difference between painted plastic and painted metal. And this locomotive has plenty of painted metal. It feels just right. It feels like and looks like how the real locomotive should. There really isn't anything to fault in this area. I particularly like the very, very complex curves on the tender have been done ever so well, and it'd be lovely to see if Dapol have got plans for releasing other locomotives that make use of similar churchwood tenders, because really in this tender they have an absolute stunner. I also really like all of that backhead detail for in the cab. It is exquisite, even down to those dials being absolutely legible. All the detail is there, and that's really all I got to say. It's the mantra of this model. The detail is there. I also like the representation of the motion underneath the boiler. This is something that really all models should have. It doesn't matter that it doesn't go round with the mechanism. The fact that it is there makes such a huge difference. And once you've seen that, all the other models that don't have this just stick out like a sore thumb. So in terms of aesthetics, I'm going to give this a 9.9 out of 10. When it comes to value for money, again, this is another area where Dapol are scoring incredibly well. This locomotive can be had for between £130 and £140 in its DC ready form. When we're firmly into the era of the £200 plus model that we've seen from other manufacturers, this locomotive is coming out at a much more favourable price. And it doesn't feel like they've compromised at all with the construction of this model to do that. There is so much metal in here, the detail is in there, the finish is in there, nothing has been skimped. On value for money, I have no hesitation to give this fine model the full 10 out of 10. And that gives us a final total of 49.2 out of 50, an incredibly high score again. But Dapol have earned this. The innovations alone on this model are great to see, and it makes me absolutely look forward to things like the D-Class that they are doing for Rails of Sheffield, because that promises to have a number of these innovations in there. And if Dapol can produce this model to this standard, I have every faith that the other models that are announced are going to be equally as good or better. Well, I hope you really enjoyed that video, and a big thanks again to Dapol for sending over this model for review. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and also remember that you can find your own version of these moguls to purchase through the affiliate link in the description box down below. It does not cost you a penny extra to use those affiliate links, but it does help out the channel a huge amount. But look, you take great care of yourself. It's been great having your company for this video. Happy modelling, and hopefully I'll see you again next time. Bye for now. Today's video is sponsored by Trainomatic, makers of DCC decoders designed to be fully compatible with every manufacturer's locomotive. Visit train-o-matic.com to browse the full range and see what they've got suitable for you. I'd like to send out a huge thanks to everybody who supports me on Patreon, and an extra special huge thanks goes out to Anthony Kidson, Michael Churchwood, Anthony Hunt, William Wade, Wayne Johns, Offshore Allen, oorail.co.uk, Tepic, Michael Lockie, Helen Sink, Peter Bolton, Brian and Dorothy Mudd, Gary Lewis, David Quinn, Sparky 107107, George Botterini, Andy Finch, Chris Moss, Robert Sears, MD of San Juan Model Company and Grant Line Products, Sam Yates, Dale Williams, and Mo Henry. Thank you. Without you guys, I couldn't do this.